Hi everyone, welcome to today's expert interview where I'm chatting to Hayley Maxwell all about how to write irresistible marketing copy that sells. So welcome Hayley, it's so good to have you here in the group.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, it's exciting.
Awesome. Can you take a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so obviously I'm Hayley Maxwell, and my business is a copywriting business. So I focus predominantly on website copy and email sequence copy, and generally for service-based business owners. So, for example, coaches or online experts, yeah, I mean that's kind of what I do. But I guess from a copywriting perspective, I really focus on trying to always make sure that I'm tapping into the client's kind of, ideal clients' dream kind of desires and those sorts of things. So from a copy perspective, it's more kind of like the art and science as opposed to just being kind of good at writing. So yeah.
It's so important, isn't it? I just feel as a marketer, copywriting is one of the top skills. Like if there's anything that you can master that is going to help you get more customers, it is writing copy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point that you raise, actually, because I often say to clients or just generally when I'm talking to people is that really everything that we do within our business, we are communicating through words. So, even if you're doing, a video, for example, you still generally will quite often, write a script or think about how you're actually going to say something. So, essentially, if you're trying to sell something or to encourage someone to take some kind of action, then it does all typically come down to your words. So if you don't have that skill of being able to write effectively, then it's going to be much more of a struggle for you as well.
Yeah, it can be a big barrier, I think, if that skill set's not there, or not realizing that when you're writing copy, it's important to tap into all of those like objections and that kind of thing. But we'll talk more about that. But this is why I've invited Hayley on today, because I feel like copy is such an important part of being able to market your business effectively, because we're using copy in everything we do, from emails, website copy, sales pages, Google ads, they need copy, Facebook ads, like all of the things that we're doing in an online business requires good copy. So you brought three main things to this chat today, Hayley. So the first one is all about learning how to speak in your ideal client's language. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So I guess what I mean by that is really looking at how, first of all, understanding kind of who your ideal client is. I know I quite often get eye rolls when I talk about this, because, it's one of those so kind of overused terms, isn't it? Ideal client or client avatar, all those sorts of things. But I think we really need to know, in order to write really good, compelling copy, you actually really need to know who you are talking to. So you really need to know that one person. And one of the mistakes I find is that lots of people sort of think, oh, I don't want to leave anyone out. I want to try and make sure that I'm speaking to all of my audience. And sometimes our audiences can be quite broad. But actually what happens is when we try and do that and we try and speak more generically to people, is we actually end up kind of resonating with no one. So, the first thing that you've got to know in order to write good copy is really around who is that one person that you are writing for. So, and that comes down to being really clear on who your ideal client is. And I'm kind of a view that you don't necessarily need to know what side of the bed that they sleep on, what color their shoes are or their favorite chocolate. You don't need to dig into all of those things, but you do need to be really clear on a huge range of things in order to kind of write that irresistible copy. And it just makes that whole writing process a lot easier. And so what it means is you need to actually dive into doing some research. And again, it's kind of another time when I get kind of eye rolls, is like, okay, research, and it sounds boring and dry and all the rest of it, but you know, a key part of, you know, tapping into, you know, your clients' pain points and speaking to them in a way that's going to resonate is really understanding how people talk about the problems that they've got, the emotions that they're feeling around that problem, you know, what motivates them and inspires them, and all those kind of things. And so it's, you know, it's so worth taking the time to kind of look at that and to dive into it. And you know, that just makes a huge amount of difference to the whole process. Because the thing with copywriting is, you know, you don't have to be, you know, it sounds strange, but me saying this, but you don't have to be the world's most amazing writer in order to write copy that's going to really speak to your ideal clients. Because actually what really good copywriting is rooted in is in that whole kind of research process, and in finding out the type of language that people use. And so there are a few different ways that you can kind of go about finding out how people are talking about, you know, some of the problems that they've got that relate to kind of an offer or your service or products. So you can obviously do things like interview your clients. So you might want to perhaps interview ideally your ideal clients, your dream clients that you've had that you would like more of, for example. And, you know, even just spend sort of 15 minutes just asking them some questions. And it could be past clients, or it could be present clients, asking them questions that are going to help to pull out some of those things around, you know, what was the main problem that they had when they first came to you? How did it make them feel? What, you know, why were they worried about it? You know, all of the kind of emotional side of things. So you can do, so do things like interviews. You can do surveys. So you could send out surveys to people, and literally, you know, if you're asking useful questions around their feelings, then, you know, hopefully they're going to sort of send you back some really good information that you can use to kind of shape your copy. You can also do things like go into Facebook groups that you know where your ideal client kind of hangs out. And in the left-hand column, there is a little search, like a search function. So you can search within groups and type in, say, your area of expertise. So for example, if I typed in, you know, email sequences or copywriting, it would bring up a whole load of people that have talked about that subject, and it might be them asking questions around a particular problem that they're having. And so, you know, you would obviously make a note of how they are talking and the exact type of language that they are using. So you can do that. I was in a group the other day actually, and I did this thing myself as well, and it was around kind of email marketing and email copy. And I brought up one comment, one post that had 127 comments on it. And it was all just pure gold in terms of people saying what they were really struggling with when it came to writing good email copy. And so that has gone into like a swipe file that I kind of keep. And so another thing that you can do is testimonials as well. When you ask for testimonials, it's really important to make sure that you are, again, asking those right questions that are going to show people sort of where someone was at the start and where they wanted to get to, or where they did get to at the end. And you can use that kind of language in your copy too, because you can literally take what those people have told you and put that into a swipe file. And what I mean by a swipe file is, for example, you could open an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc or something like that, or a Google Sheet. And literally you could have different headings along the top, and it might be something like, you know, pain points, the emotions that they're feeling, all of those sorts of things. And underneath that, you can literally, you know, copy and paste what people are saying in terms of how they are feeling and what they're thinking. and you can put that into your swipe file, and you just keep adding to it over time. And so that every time you come to write a new piece of marketing copy, you can go back to your swipe file and you can look for exactly the right words that you are going to need in order to write really good copy that's going to kind of really speak to the people that you're trying to attract. And it's basically called, it's a process where we call it sort of mirroring. So essentially you're just mirroring back to your ideal clients exactly what they are already thinking in their heads. So sometimes you'll see people saying, oh, you know, it's like you're inside my head. And quite often it is because people have spent that amount of, you know, time beforehand gathering insights into their ideal clients and really finding out how those ideal clients talk, so that they can just use that language and mirror it back to them. And that's the kind of copy that is really what I call kind of sticky. You know, it kind of sticks around in people's brains a lot more because they just think, oh my God, this person, you know, really knows what I'm going through and what I'm experiencing, and also where I want to get to.
I love that, especially the fact that, like, because I know that a lot of people consider themselves to be not great at writing, so then it becomes this barrier, you know, like, I can't write, so I can't do a particular thing, or I, you know, don't know how to structure the sentences and all of that kind of thing. But this research kind of empowers those people that don't feel like they're great writers, because then it's literally a case of writing in the language that your customers use, so that if you take the time to do that research, you can actually become a good copywriter simply by using their language.
Yeah, and it's totally possible, you know, like people do think, oh, you know, I'm not going to write as well as a copywriter. I think you know, potentially that could be the case, but it shouldn't stop you from you know, really trying to look at different ways to kind of elevate your copy. Because, you know, I guess my perspective is always that you can be, you know, a really good copywriter for your own business. And yes, there are definitely times when you might want to invest in using a copywriter, but for the most part, I think it's really good to learn the basic skills. And, you know, as I say, from a copywriting perspective, if you're wanting it to sort of tap in and help people to make decisions around whether they're going to buy from you or take a particular action with you, it is all rooted really strongly in that research phase. And when I work with clients, I will rarely work on any projects that don't involve any sort of the research element, because I can't do my job if I haven't researched how their ideal clients are, you know, thinking and feeling and where they're wanting to get to. And so it is really more about that science, rather than thinking you've got to be quite artistic with or creative, because actually you don't necessarily want all the kind of creative fluff around sales copy that you're writing. You actually want to just be really, really specific and really targeted. So that's why the research side is really important.
Yeah, and I think when you are writing sales copy, you know, myself working with clients on this kind of thing, there's a hesitation there about being too pushy or too salesy. But when it's actually written for their ideal client in mind, what actually happens is that you're attracting the ones that actually really need what you're offering and repelling the ones that you don't necessarily want to work with. So I think there's like a huge advantage. I consider the ideal client work and the messaging like foundational to any online marketing. Like it's quite common, you see these like influencers who just blow up, you know, and they have like an amazing social media following, but they can't really, they're not good writers. Like oftentimes there's like typos and all of that kind of thing, but the reason they're successful is because they know who they're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. You know, it is exactly that. You know, it's just being really clear on actually who you're trying to attract, and just writing copy that you know is going to resonate with them. And the thing is you won't come across as salesy in your copy when you are writing to the ideal client and when you are offering a solution that's really going to support them to move forward in their business, because that's exactly what they are needing. So, and because you are resonating with them so strongly in terms of the language, because you're mirroring it back to them, it's not actually going to feel pushy at all to them. They are going to be thinking, you know, this is really describing how I'm feeling, and this is describing where I'm wanting to get, you know, it's already kind of, it's not coming to them from a kind of a pushy place already.
Yeah. And it doesn't really matter what those other people think.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, you know, people who aren't right for that particular product or service, of course, if you're writing it, then they're not going to resonate with those words, because they're not the right people. And so they might feel like it's a little bit more pushy because they're not completely kind of resonating with the messages that are there, because it's not for them. So I think that that's something that we've always got to bear in mind when we write the copy, is that actually, you know, unless you're being completely kind of, you know, Harvey Norman style, you know, salesy, then, you know, if you're writing something that's coming directly from, you know, from the mouths of your ideal clients anyway, then it's just going to kind of tap into what they're thinking anyway.
Yeah, I love all of that. I do those things too, all the research things that you talked about, and it doesn't really matter how long I've been in business. When I redo it, I find it so valuable. So it doesn't matter whether you're starting up or been in business for years. I think your ideal client always needs polishing up. It can always be refined further, and your copy that relates to that. So I love completely. That. So the next thing that we were going to talk about was the importance of future pacing in your copy. AKA painting a picture of the future that they can have. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so future pacing is, you know, as you just said, so it is about using our kind of words in order to paint this picture of how someone can potentially feel down the track once they have worked with you, essentially. And so again, like anything I'm kind of doing with writing, you're tapping into that kind of research that you've already done, that we've just talked about. And so by doing that research, you will find out where it is that your ideal clients really want to be, you know, for example, in their business. So you'll find out what their pain points are, so their current status. And then you will also find out, you know, what the transformation is that they're really looking for. I think sometimes we kind of assume like that we know what people want and where they want to get, but actually, again, like I said, it is all back to that research and just finding out from them directly, you know, what is it, where do they want to get to in their business, and what's going to make them feel amazing and make a real difference. And so once we know that, then we need to get to a point of kind of creating this mental imagery with our ideal clients. So in our copy is creating kind of a mental image. So for example, you might be writing something and you might start off with, you know, the pain point, so the problem that they're currently facing. And then you would obviously move through to talking about, you know, how your offering or your service is going to help them. And then obviously from a future perspective, you can say things like, you know, imagine this or picture this, because that starts helping them to think, okay, I'm imagining myself down the track. And then you need to sort of paint that picture using your words and the words that you've garnered from them in terms of how they are going to feel once they've kind of done the work with you, and you know they've got to that other side. And so it's, you know, tapping into all of those things, like, you know, you might have, for example, it could be, you know more time, but not just more time, it's what does that time look like for some people or for your ideal client, and writing that in your copy. So for some people it could be more time means, you know, more time spent with their children, you know, or their family or loved ones, or, you know, more money. Well, what does more money mean for your ideal client? You know, is it more sort of financial freedom? Does your ideal client want to do more traveling, or, you know, have they got some other goals that they're particularly wanting to achieve? And so by being as specific as possible, we can start to sort of paint a much clearer picture for the readers, basically, of our copy. And it just helps to take them from the point of, you know, I'm feeling stuck and overwhelmed, and is this going to help me to solve my problems, to showing them that yes, it will help you to solve the problems, but it will also do this as well. So it's about highlighting the transformations and the benefits and that side of things. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Future pacing is used quite a lot in life coaching as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think, in the sort of NLP kind of realms, I think, isn't it, around that whole kind of future pacing state. And the thing about copywriting is that a lot of it is rooted in kind of psychology and particularly, you know, consumer behavior and consumer psychology. So, you know, if you're kind of looking to kind of up, you know, your copywriting game from, you know, writing that kind of irresistible sales copy, then, you know, a good place to always look is around, you know, consumer psychology and how people kind of make purchasing decisions. And that's all about, you know, tapping into the kind of the neuroscience, I guess, and the power of persuasion.
Yeah, because obviously I've done university training and all of that in marketing, and a few years ago I trained in NLP and life coaching, and I was just like, every day I was like, oh my god, this is like marketing. It's actually marketing is totally modeled off that world. Oh, completely. Because, and I think you know, one of the big things is when we come to write copy, we're so used to you know, describing features and also describing the logical side of things, when actually what you want to be doing with copy that's really going to kind of help you to kind of make sales or get someone to take an action is all about kind of digging into the emotional side. And so that's why it's also connected with the kind of the neuroscience and the psychology side of things, because it all comes down to human behavior, so how we think and feel and act. So that's why it's always a good place to kind of, you know, start from that perspective. Yeah, because all purchases are made emotionally and then backed up by logical factors.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's important to have that in your copy as well, I think. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So I've noticed as well that a big barrier for a lot of small business owners is writing a piece of copy and, you know, wanting a framework or something to follow. Like, what can I have as like a tool up my sleeve that can help me go from sitting there and not knowing even where to start to creating some copy that's really going to connect with the ideal client. So it could be a social media post, anything really. So you're going to talk through a simple copywriting formula that might help a lot of those listening in this area.
Yeah. So I guess one of the simplest kind of copywriting formulas or frameworks that we can use, and that kind of, again, goes back to what we've just been talking about, so the future pacing and also the research stage, is it's problem, agitation, solution. It's a framework, so it's commonly just called, you know, the acronym. So it's the PAS framework. And essentially it's probably the easiest one for me to kind of quickly explain, but also for you to be able to apply, like you said just now, to kind of any piece of sales copy that you're writing. So essentially what you do is you start by kind of highlighting the problem that you've got. Obviously that's why it starts with problem. But with that, so essentially it's just starting out by working out, when you're writing a piece of copy, what is the biggest problem that my potential client or a dream client has got that I'm trying to kind of grab their attention with. And so it's just starting by framing that in a fairly simple terms. You know, you don't need to go into it in huge amounts of detail at first. It's just kind of looking at interesting ways that you can grab their attention by kind of resonating with them and the problem that they're having. And then you would move into that kind of agitation stage, which is then basically getting some salt and just kind of rubbing it into
the way.
Just a little bit more. It sounds terrible. But what I mean by that in the nicest possible way is, so this is when you really start to talk about what it is that someone is going through. So you've highlighted your problem, and then you know, you might start to talk about how that makes them feel. So you're tapping into those, you know, emotions. So you're digging into that psychological side of things again. Mm-hmm. So for example, you know, if I was writing a piece of copy, you know, and it was around, say, writing emails to your email list, for example, I might start off by saying, you know, do you sit down at something along like, do you sit down at the computer? You go to write an email to your subscribers, but you know, you just kind of stare at a blank screen and think, what the heck do I write? So, you know, this is off the top of my head, but yeah, so it would be, you know, that's the framing for the problem. And then I would start going into some of the agitation around, you know, for example, you know, you can be sitting there writing and rewriting that same paragraph, you know, 50 times. You only meant to spend 10 minutes writing this, but you've been there for 3 hours already. You know, your to-do list is, you know, growing and growing. There's a whole heap of other stuff that you need to be getting on with, but you're still staring at this blank Google Doc. So you see that you've kind of taken the problem, and now you're kind of diving into some of those things that are actually making it that problem. You're kind of really just rubbing it in so that people go, oh my God, yes, you know, that's what I do. You know, I just sit there, or it takes me 3 hours to write something that should only take me 20 minutes kind of thing. So you do that a little bit more, you kind of agitate it, and as you're doing that, you sort of flow down, and then you start to bring in the solution side of things, which essentially is your solution. So what it is that you're offering that can help people to overcome all those problems that you have just described. And obviously when you're describing those problems, you do want to kind of add some nice specifics into it. Mm-hmm. And so then you start to highlight that solution that you offer and how it's going to support people to kind of overcome some of, you know, the obstacles that they're facing, and how, you know, it's going to kind of support them to improve where they're currently at and take them to kind of the next level of where they're hoping to be. So you can kind of see, like, obviously with this particular framework, you can kind of see how important that initial research is for all of these parts. Because if you don't know that, you could be sitting there, you know, like I've just said, you could be sitting there staring at a blank Google Doc for hours trying to work out what you're going to write. So, yeah, by knowing all these things, it just helps to break it down and just make it much more kind of manageable, I guess. And there is kind of an added extra that you can add on to this particular copy framework, which is essentially where you then show the outcome. So it kind of becomes a pay zone. So, and that would be where you then start to put in things like your social proof, particular results you've got for people, and anything else that's supporting some of the outcomes that you're saying that you can get for people. So it's just taking people through a really logical kind of stepped process to get them to that end point where it then makes it really easy for them to take action, or for them to know whether something is completely right for them or not. So it just makes it, yeah, a lot more easy for them to kind of resonate and then kind of desire what you've got because of the way that you're talking about it in your copy, and then obviously move forwards and take action.
So that O in the PASO model is like the future pacing, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of does tap into that future pacing, but you would also do some of that future pacing in the solution stage as well. Because in the outcome side of things, you are wanting to kind of tap into experiences that other people have had, that social proof side of things, just to show how they can have that future as well. So those two are kind of quite closely connected. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So one thing that I notice quite a lot is that people don't want to market where they're focusing on people's pains all of the time.
Yeah.
Do you get that objection much?
No, I don't. I don't get that. I haven't really had that so much, because I think that, you know, when we're looking for products and services, we are generally in a stage of, we've got something going on in our lives that we need to solve. And so I find that one of the quickest ways to be able to really target people is to be able to basically say right up front, you know, this is the problem that, you know, you have got, you know, and you're sort of spelling it out quite clearly to them. So they go, that's what I need. Because people come to us in so many different kind of stages of awareness. So I think it's really important to know kind of what stage of awareness your customer or your client is at when they come to you, in order so that you can write the kind of focus on the problem that's going to resonate with them most. I haven't necessarily had too much kind of in the way of pushback or feedback to say, oh, I'm not so sure about focusing on the kind of the negative side of things. You can use, there is another copywriting formula which focuses on attention first. But I have always found that your problem is generally a much more kind of higher converting way to go, because it's just tapping straight into what someone needs straight away. It's saying, hey, this is what you're going through.
Is that AITA?
It's attention, interest, desire, action.
Yeah, desire, yeah. I remember learning that when I studied advertising. That's like a really typical advertising, like TV model, right? Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and that's because you know, with things like TV advertising, you've got really short spaces of time. It's not written, for example, so you've got to grab that attention straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas in written form, you know, people can take just that little bit longer to kind of read through and go through. And so the idea is that you would be taking them through that problem, agitation, solution kind of formula, and you would then be creating this kind of positive feeling and evoking all these positive kind of emotions by the end of it. So it's just kind of almost turning things on the head and just starting from the problem and working towards more positive sort of sensation, feeling.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you say, like, it's not a billboard. It's like sales copy written is so much different to a billboard. And, you know, with Facebook ads, there's a lot of debate, short copy or long copy kind of argument, or like, you know, a lot of people also, I see in Facebook groups, a lot of people saying sales pages are way too long. You know, but there's actually a reason why they are that length, because for the person that is actually invested in solving their problem that this relates to, then there's a reason why it's so long, because it talks people through all the different stages, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It talks them through all the stages. And for example, you know, with sales page copy, and even if you're writing things like email sequences, you are taking them through those stages, but you're also addressing, you know, objections along the way as well. So, you know, you're looking at all the possible objections that your, you know, ideal client or, you know, ideal kind of purchaser would have, and you're actually busting them basically in that copy, so that by the time that they get to the end of that sales copy, those objections are no longer, a big deal.
They've been resolved. Yeah.
They've been kind of resolved by the time, and common objections are things like, money and, time investments. So anything that requires any of those, you're going to need to do some work on busting some objections as well. But it's like anything. If you are the right person for a particular product or offer, it doesn't actually matter how long, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter how long the copy is, because you are going to resonate with it kind of so deeply. If all the research has been done to help you write it, that person's going to resonate with it so deeply, it's not going to feel like a big long chore to scroll through it. It will only feel like a big long chore if you're not the right person for it, to read it. And I always say, copy needs to be, I don't know if it's necessarily helpful, but copy needs to be as long as it needs to be in order to move people through those stages, sort of resonate with them, draw them in, and then obviously bust some of those objections, give them that social proof, and then obviously you sort of have the call to action, towards the end or slightly higher up as well. So, it is a case of, it needs to be as long as it needs to be, but not any longer, which is always a bit of a tricky thing to kind of go,
Yeah, and they take a long time to write, like sales pages. They're a big investment time-wise. So,
but I think, the thing with writing, copy is that any copy that we write about our business should be regarded as sales copy. Because every time we write, we are communicating a message about our business, about our services, so we should always be writing it thinking, how can I make this copy work really hard for my business? So it's worthwhile just taking that little bit of extra time to think, how can I incorporate some of these elements, that I've been discussing today, into this piece of copy, regardless of whether it's a Facebook post or a Facebook ad or an email. It's just looking at it, it needs to be kind of your online salesperson kind of 24/7, and particularly in the case of website copy as well, that's another kind of example where website copy is actually sales copy too.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I've got a question here in the comments from BB. And she asked, do you have any tips on how someone can edit their own copy before publishing?
So edit it, okay. I do. I mean, I guess it depends it also depends what copy you're writing in terms of what type of copy. But generally, what I do is, once I start by writing, and I will write a draft, and I try not to edit it as I'm writing that first draft. I try and just brain dump it all out, and sometimes it looks like a pile of spaghetti kind of on the plate, all tangled, but I get it out, and then I start going through it and thinking logically, kind of using maybe some of those formulas I've talked about, and reordering it into a flow. But you want to be looking for things like, does every line of your copy have do one job? So for example, is your headline strong enough to then take you down into encourage people to read the kind of next section of your copy, your opening header, kind of, your introduction? And does that introduction then encourage people to then move people down to read the next part of the copy? So every line of copy needs to have one job, and that's to move people through it.
I love that.
And so then another thing that I would do would be to look at copy from the perspective of, is everything that I'm writing clear? So doing kind of a bit of a clarity sweep. So obviously going through and just getting rid of anything that isn't isn't particularly clear, or rewriting it and making sure that it all then still kind of flows well throughout. And then obviously looking at it from that logical perspective of, you know, if I am writing this to someone, you know, what are the things that I need to make sure I've included? So have I highlighted that problem? Have I, you know, really tapped into some of the desires? And so making sure that all of those things are in your copy too, and obviously making sure that you do have a call to action. And typically when you're writing sales copy, you generally only want one call to action. And that doesn't mean that you can't have that call to action sort of repeated throughout your copy. You'd quite often have it in several places, but always be driving people to that one place with that one call to action. So those are probably some of the main things that I would do. I'd also go through and remove any kind of superfluous words that are kind of not adding anything to the copy. I think, as I kind of talked to earlier, you know, we tend to think we've got to make our writing look and sound, you know, pretty and exciting and interesting and sort of flowery, but we don't need that. You know, people will read long copy, but it's got to be good long copy. It's got to, you know, hold their attention, and it can't be kind of filled with kind of fillers, you know, or that kind of the fluff side. So go through really with a kind of an objective eye, if you can, and think, you know, are these words that I'm using adding anything to it, or are there certain words that I can actually take out just to simplify it? So keep things really, really simple, particularly if you're not, you know, a confident writer. But, you know, the more that you do that, the stronger you'll become kind of over time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, there's this thing of I'm not a good writer, but or the, you know, belief that some people have about themselves, but it is about repetition and practice, and the more you do this stuff, the better you're going to get, and the faster that probably editing process might get, because I find the editing is the most time consuming part.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I think it's like, so for example, if clients come to me and they're wanting a rewrite of something, or they're just wanting something edited, I often find that to edit something actually takes me longer than if I was to kind of go through the process and write it from scratch, because, you know, you are going through and trying to, and obviously then it's someone else's copy anyway, but, you know, you're going through and you're looking at all those elements. So whereas if you're writing something, the more you become used to doing it in a particular way, the more you kind of start to incorporate that as your writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. So I hope that helps BB on how to edit her own copy before publishing.
Fingers crossed.
I love that idea of every line should be taking you further towards the goal rather than words for fluff. Because like when you've got like all the fillers and stuff, people lose focus quite fast, I think, especially if you're targeting a market like mums or something like that, that's super busy. They don't have time to read lots of filler words. And
that's it. And I think, you know, business owner, you know, any business owner really, like small business owner, we're all busy, we're all wearing a million different hats, and so I think it is, from my perspective, I've always found that the most effective copy is copy that kind of gets straight into it. For example, you know, with websites, you always, you know, it's always good to have that kind of value proposition straight away as soon as someone's hitting your website, rather than you know, a big kind of welcome and that side of things. You just want to really state what someone is going to get here and why it's right for them. So, you know, what your unique value proposition is. And it's the same with emails. It's funny because with emails, so many of us feel like when we're writing an email, we've got to kind of add a bit of that introduction almost to what we're going to write about. Like, you know, it's almost like you're saying, you know, hi, I'm writing today about XYZ, and then you go into telling them about XYZ, whereas actually sometimes you can just drop people straight into the kind of the action. And that is another copywriting tactic as well. It's I don't know if you've heard of in media res. So it's basically when you watch films and things like that, quite often when a film starts, say it's a film about, I don't know, knights and kings and things like that, quite often those films will start in the middle of a battle scene. Immediately dropped into a battle scene, and you quite quickly work out, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys and what's happening. And that's the case of in media res, where people have just sort of dropped into it, and it does make sense. And so I always encourage people to try and write from that perspective, is actually try and do away with all that preamble and just get straight to the point, really, of the email, because people haven't got time to sit around, for a long time and work through something. They just want to know something kind of now.
I started a book last night, actually, that did that, dropped you straight into the action, which was quite good, because I read like 3 chapters, which is unheard of for me, because if it's that introduction, then you kind of like, you read 1 chapter and then you're like, I'll do the next chapter another time, because it's not compelling enough that you've got to keep reading.
Exactly, that's it. And that's the whole thing with dropping people into the action, that in media res is actually you're grabbing their attention straight away. And as I say, that works really well in particularly in email copy as well.
Yeah, because I don't feel like sales copy or Facebook ad copy, it doesn't need the typical intro, middle, conclusion at all, does it?
No,
like blog posts, you can use that more, even on like Facebook Lives and stuff like that. But when it comes to actual writing, that's not what sales copy is. For those of you,
and I think there's, I think people also kind of get confused by. I mean, I think that there's quite a clear difference between copywriting, like you were just sort of saying, copywriting and content writing, because the 2 things have actually got quite separate jobs. So copywriting is really around getting people to take action. It's about sales, or it's about some other form of action, whereas the content writing side of things is more about supporting your business goals and building that kind of know, like, trust factor. So that and they both involve quite different skills. So like you can see from what we've been talking about today, the copywriting side of things is really rooted so much in that kind of science, that research and that psychology, whereas the content writing isn't necessarily so rooted in any of those kind of persuasion principles either. But it's still, that's not to say that it's not important. It's still a really important part of the overall process. It's just, I view copywriting and content writing as 2 quite separate things.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you there. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today, Hayley. And
my pleasure.
I really enjoyed chatting to you about all things
likewise.
copywriting.
I hope it was useful.
I'm sure those listening have gotten something out of it today. So where can people find you, Hayley? People can find me. I like to hang out on Instagram probably the most. So I am at Hayley Maxwell Writes on Instagram, and my website is also my name, so hayleymaxwell.com. So those are probably the two best places to come and hang out. And if you've got any questions about today, either I guess ask them in the group, because I'm in the group too, so I can obviously hop in and answer them there, or just feel free to connect with me on Instagram. So amazing. Exciting. Thank you. Go and check Hayley out if you haven't already. Thanks for coming along today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.